The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval amphibious base as Commander Sarah "Ghost" Martinez walked through the training facility corridors. At 34, she moved with the quiet confidence that came from 12 years of elite service, including 3 deployments in Afghanistan and 2 classified missions that would never see official records. Her boots made barely a whisper against the polished floor, a habit ingrained from countless night operations where silence meant survival. Sarah had earned her call sign Ghost during her second tour, when she successfully infiltrated a Taliban compound and extracted 3 captured Marines without a single enemy detecting her presence. The rescued Marines later said she appeared and disappeared like a spirit, leading them to safety through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate undetected. The name stuck, and over the years it became synonymous with precision, stealth, and unwavering determination. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter in her career. After years of field operations, Sarah had accepted a position as senior instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center. The decision hadn't been easy. Part of her missed the adrenaline rush of combat missions, but she understood the importance of passing her knowledge to the next generation of operators. The Navy needed experienced instructors who could prepare new recruits for the harsh realities they would face in the field. As she approached the main training hall, Sarah reviewed the files of the incoming class. 23 recruits had made it through the initial screening process, a mix of fresh academy graduates and experienced sailors looking to advance their careers. Most showed promise, but 3 names on the roster gave her pause. Jackson Mills, Ryan Torres, and Brett Harrison had all come from traditional combat units where women in special operations were still viewed with skepticism. Mills, in particular, had a reputation that preceded him. The 26-year-old former Marine had served 2 tours in Iraq before transferring to the Navy. His service record was impressive, but several informal reports mentioned his resistance to taking orders from female superior officers. During his last assignment, he had been reprimanded for making inappropriate comments about women in combat roles, though no formal charges were filed. Torres and Harrison were younger, both 22, and had grown up together in a small Texas town before enlisting. They were known for their tight bond and shared attitudes about traditional military hierarchy. Their previous commanding officers described them as capable soldiers, but noted their tendency to question authority when it came from anyone they perceived as less experienced or qualified than themselves. Sarah understood the challenge these 3 would present. Throughout her career, she had encountered similar attitudes from male colleagues who couldn't accept that a woman could match or exceed their capabilities. Early in her service, these encounters had frustrated her, but experience had taught her that actions spoke louder than words. She had learned to let her performance do the talking, earning respect through demonstration rather than argument. The training facility buzzed with activity as recruits gathered for their first day. Sarah observed them from a distance, noting the natural groupings that formed. Mills, Torres, and Harrison gravitated toward each other, their body language suggesting they had already established themselves as the unofficial leaders among their peers. They stood slightly apart from the others, surveying their competition with the confidence of men who believed they belonged at the top of any hierarchy. Other recruits showed more diverse backgrounds and attitudes. Among them was Maria Gonzalez, a former Army medic seeking to join the SEALs Medical Support Unit. There was also David Kim, a Navy intelligence specialist hoping to transition to field operations, and several others who had distinguished themselves in previous assignments. Sarah made mental notes about each individual, already beginning to assess their strengths and potential areas for development. When the official briefing began, Sarah took her position at the front of the room alongside the other instructors. The commanding officer, Captain Robert Hayes, introduced the teaching staff and outlined the program's objectives. When he reached Sarah's introduction, she noticed Mills exchange a knowing look with his companions. Their expressions suggested they had already formed opinions about her qualifications. Captain Hayes emphasized the rigorous nature of the training ahead. The program would test every aspect of their physical, mental, and emotional capabilities. Only those who demonstrated exceptional skill, unwavering determination, and absolute reliability would earn the privilege of joining the Special Operations community. He made it clear that there would be no shortcuts, no favoritism, and no tolerance for anything less than complete commitment. After the formal presentation, recruits were divided into smaller groups for initial assessments. Sarah found herself assigned to evaluate physical fitness and basic combat skills. This was exactly the opportunity she had anticipated. Rather than addressing attitudes through lectures or confrontation, she would demonstrate her capabilities through practical application. The first exercise involved hand-to-hand combat techniques. Sarah paired recruits against each other, observing their form, technique, and adaptability. When she demonstrated proper execution of various moves, she noticed Mills watching with obvious skepticism. His posture suggested he was mentally cataloging what he perceived as weaknesses in her approach. Torres stepped forward when Sarah called for volunteers to demonstrate defensive techniques. He was built like a linebacker, standing 6 feet 3 inches and weighing over 200 pounds. His movements showed confidence gained through years of physical training and combat experience. When Sarah positioned herself as his opponent for the demonstration, she heard quiet chuckling from Harrison's direction. The exercise proceeded normally at first. Sarah explained the importance of using an opponent's size and strength against them, emphasizing technique over brute force. Torres nodded along, but his expression suggested he was merely humoring her. When the time came for actual demonstration, his approach became more aggressive than necessary for a training exercise. Sarah recognized his intent immediately. Torres was testing her, trying to prove a point to his friends and the other recruits. Instead of following the controlled movements appropriate for instruction, he attempted to use his size advantage to overwhelm her defenses. This was exactly the kind of challenge Sarah had faced countless times throughout her career. Moving with fluid precision, Sarah deflected Torres's initial advance and used his forward momentum to execute a perfect hip throw. The larger man found himself flat on his back before he fully understood what had happened. The demonstration concluded with Sarah maintaining a submission hold that left Torres completely immobilized despite his size advantage. The room fell silent. Other recruits stared in obvious surprise, while Mills and Harrison's expressions shifted from amusement to uncertainty. Torres himself looked genuinely shocked as he realized how completely he had been outmaneuvered. Sarah helped him to his feet with the same professional demeanor she had maintained throughout the exercise. Rather than gloating or making pointed comments about the outcome, Sarah simply continued with the lesson. She explained the biomechanics behind the technique, emphasizing how proper leverage and timing could overcome significant differences in size and strength. Her tone remained instructional and respectful, treating the demonstration as a learning opportunity rather than a victory to be celebrated. However, the three friends were not deterred by this initial display. If anything, it seemed to strengthen their resolve to prove that Sarah's success was somehow illegitimate. Over the following days, they began implementing a subtle campaign designed to undermine her authority and credibility. Mills took the lead in these efforts, using his experience and charisma to influence other recruits. During breaks and mealtimes, he would make casual comments questioning whether the instructors were being too easy on certain trainees. He never mentioned Sarah directly, but his implications were clear to anyone paying attention. Torres and Harrison supported these efforts by demonstrating subtle disrespect during Sarah's instruction sessions. They would arrive slightly late, ask questions that challenged her expertise without seeming openly insubordinate, and exchange meaningful glances when they disagreed with her teaching methods. Their behavior walked the fine line between acceptable skepticism and outright disrespect. Sarah recognized these tactics because she had encountered them before. Some individuals, when unable to challenge her competence directly, would resort to psychological warfare designed to create doubt in the minds of others. The goal was to isolate her by making other recruits question her authority and expertise. The situation escalated during the second week of training when the class moved into more advanced combat scenarios. These exercises required recruits to work in teams under high-stress conditions, simulating the kind of environments they would face in actual operations. Sarah served as both instructor and evaluator, observing their performance and providing real-time feedback. During one particularly challenging exercise, Mills deliberately ignored Sarah's tactical guidance, instead implementing his own strategy. When his approach led to mission failure, he argued that the scenario had been unfairly designed to favor techniques that weren't practical in real combat situations. His criticism was delivered respectfully enough to avoid formal disciplinary action, but his intent was clear. Other recruits began to notice the tension developing between Sarah and the three friends. Some seemed genuinely confused by the dynamic, while others appeared to be choosing sides. The situation was creating exactly the kind of division that could undermine the entire training program's effectiveness. Sarah found herself facing a familiar dilemma. She could report the behavior to Captain Hayes, but doing so might reinforce stereotypes about women being unable to handle workplace conflicts. Alternatively, she could continue to address the situation through professional demonstration, hoping that her competence would eventually win over the skeptics. The decision became more urgent when she overheard a conversation between Mills and several other recruits. He was suggesting that Sarah's previous service record might have been exaggerated or that she had received special treatment because of her gender. These accusations struck at the heart of everything Sarah had worked to achieve throughout her career. That evening, Sarah sat in her office reviewing training reports and considering her options. Through her window, she could see recruits gathered in the common area, engaged in the kind of informal socializing that helped build unit cohesion. Mills, Torres, and Harrison sat at the center of one group, clearly dominating the conversation. Sarah had faced discrimination before, but this situation felt different. As an instructor, she had responsibility not only for her own reputation, but for the integrity of the entire program. If she allowed these three recruits to successfully undermine her authority, it would set a precedent that could affect future female instructors and operators. The next morning brought news that would test everyone's resolve. Captain Hayes announced that the class would be participating in an advanced survival exercise that would last 3 days. Recruits would be divided into small teams and dropped in a remote location with minimal equipment. Their mission would be to navigate to a designated extraction point while avoiding capture by opposing forces played by experienced instructors. Sarah would be leading the opposition team, responsible for testing the recruits' evasion and survival skills. This exercise would provide the perfect opportunity to demonstrate her field capabilities under conditions that closely resembled actual combat operations. As teams were assigned, Mills, Torres, and Harrison maneuvered to ensure they were grouped together. Their confidence was obvious as they prepared for the challenge ahead. From their perspective, this would be an opportunity to prove their superiority in an environment where physical strength and traditional combat skills would be paramount. What they didn't realize was that survival exercises favored exactly the kind of skills that had made Sarah legendary during her field service. Her ability to move undetected, think strategically under pressure, and exploit environmental advantages had been proven in actual combat situations where failure meant death. The stage was set for a confrontation that would go far beyond a simple training exercise. 3 recruits who questioned Sarah's qualifications were about to face the reality of what 12 years of elite service had taught her. They would learn why she had earned the call sign Ghost and why her reputation among special operations personnel was built on genuine achievement rather than political correctness. As preparations for the exercise continued, Sarah felt the familiar calm that preceded challenging operations. She had spent years proving herself in environments where doubt could be fatal and respect had to be earned through performance. This would be no different, except that the stakes were educational rather than life or death. The recruits would soon discover that questioning Commander Sarah Martinez's qualifications was one thing, but surviving an encounter with Ghost in her element would require skills they had yet to develop. The next 3 days would provide lessons that would stay with them for the rest of their careers, assuming they were capable of learning them. The helicopters lifted off from the naval base at dawn, carrying the recruits toward their drop zones in the mountainous wilderness of Southern California. Sarah sat with the opposing force team, reviewing topographical maps and finalizing their strategy for the 3-day exercise. As an instructor, she would be hunting the recruit teams, testing their ability to evade capture while completing their mission objectives. The terrain below stretched endlessly, a harsh landscape of rocky canyons, dense brush, and steep ridges that would challenge even experienced operators. This was the kind of environment where Sarah had honed her skills during countless training exercises and real missions. Every shadow, every sound, every movement would have meaning in the game of cat and mouse that was about to begin. Mills, Torres, and Harrison sat together in the transport helicopter, reviewing their equipment and discussing strategy. They had been assigned a route that would take them through some of the most challenging terrain in the exercise area. Their confidence remained high despite the difficulty ahead. From their perspective, this was simply an advanced camping trip with some added tactical elements. "Remember," Mills told his teammates as they approached the drop zone, "stick to basic infantry tactics. These Navy instructors think they're hot stuff, but real combat experience beats classroom theory every time." Torres and Harrison nodded in agreement, their faith in Mills's leadership unshakable. What they failed to understand was that Sarah's classroom theory had been developed through 12 years of operations where mistakes resulted in casualties rather than poor grades. Her approach to hunting enemy forces had been tested against opponents who were genuinely trying to kill her, not recruits following safety protocols during training exercises. The drop proceeded smoothly, with recruit teams being inserted at various points throughout the exercise area. Mills, Torres, and Harrison found themselves deposited on a ridge overlooking a valley that would be their primary avenue of approach toward the extraction point. According to their maps, they had approximately 30 miles to cover in 3 days, while avoiding capture by the opposing force. Their initial movements showed the kind of confidence that came from successful conventional training. They maintained good spacing, communicated effectively, and demonstrated solid fieldcraft as they began their journey. However, their approach was predictable, following standard procedures that would work well against similarly trained opponents but offered little challenge to someone with Sarah's experience. Sarah and her team began tracking the recruit groups within hours of the exercise's start. Using a combination of technological surveillance and traditional field techniques, they quickly identified the likely routes each team would follow. The mountainous terrain offered limited viable paths, and experienced operators could predict movement patterns with remarkable accuracy. The first team Sarah encountered was led by David Kim, the former intelligence specialist. His group had chosen a cautious approach, moving slowly but carefully through areas that offered concealment. When Sarah's team initiated contact, Kim's group executed a textbook evasion maneuver, successfully breaking contact and disappearing into the rocky terrain. Sarah was impressed by their performance. Kim had clearly studied the lessons from their classroom sessions and adapted them effectively to field conditions. His team demonstrated the kind of thinking that separated good operators from merely adequate ones. They understood that survival often depended more on avoiding confrontation than winning firefights. Mills's team, by contrast, was following a more aggressive strategy. Their military training emphasized taking initiative and maintaining momentum, concepts that served them well in conventional combat, but were potentially problematic in evasion scenarios. They moved quickly through the terrain, covering ground efficiently, but leaving signs that experienced trackers could easily follow. On their first night in the field, the three friends established a defensive position in a small canyon that offered good fields of fire and multiple escape routes. Their security procedures were adequate, and they demonstrated competent camp discipline. However, their choice of location revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the exercise's objectives. Rather than prioritizing concealment, they had selected a position that would allow them to fight if discovered. This approach reflected their combat training, which emphasized meeting enemy contact with superior firepower and aggressive tactics. Unfortunately, the exercise scenario required them to avoid detection entirely, making their defensive mindset a potential liability. Sarah observed their position from a distance, noting their strengths and weaknesses. Their tactical competence was evident in how they organized their perimeter and established watch rotations. However, their position was too obvious to anyone familiar with how soldiers thought about terrain. They had chosen the same type of location that military forces had favored for centuries, making them predictable to an experienced hunter. Instead of immediately capturing them, Sarah decided to use their position as a teaching opportunity. Over the next several hours, she and her team maneuvered around the canyon, demonstrating how easily their position could be surrounded without their knowledge. The exercise would be more valuable if the recruits learned through experience rather than simple defeat. Meanwhile, Mills continued to express confidence in their approach. During the night watches, he explained to Torres and Harrison how their military training gave them advantages over the college-trained instructors who lacked real combat experience. His assessment was based on assumptions about Sarah's background that were completely incorrect, but his teammates had no reason to question his expertise. "The thing about these special operations types," Mills explained quietly during his watch shift, "is that they rely too much on fancy equipment and complicated tactics. When it comes down to basic field skills and combat experience, regular infantry training beats their theoretical approach every time." Torres and Harrison absorbed this wisdom without question. Mills had always been the most experienced among them, and his confidence was infectious. They believed that their conventional training and superior physical conditioning would be enough to outperform any instructor who challenged them. The second day of the exercise brought their first direct encounter with Sarah's capabilities. As the team moved through a heavily wooded valley, they began to notice subtle signs that they were being followed. Broken twigs, disturbed earth, and other indicators suggested that someone was tracking their movement. Mills recognized these signs and immediately shifted his team into an anti-tracking mode. They began using techniques designed to confuse pursuers, including false trails, backtracking, and movement through terrain that would obscure their tracks. Their execution was competent, demonstrating solid understanding of basic evasion principles. However, Sarah was not a basic pursuer. Her tracking skills had been developed through years of hunting insurgents who were fighting for their lives and had intimate knowledge of local terrain. She could read signs that most operators would miss entirely and predict movement patterns based on subtle psychological cues. While Mills's team was implementing their anti-tracking procedures, Sarah had already identified their likely destination and moved ahead to wait for them. Rather than following their trail directly, she used her understanding of terrain and human behavior to predict where they would go. This approach allowed her to maintain contact while remaining completely undetected. The psychological pressure of knowing they were being hunted began to affect the team's decision-making. Torres became increasingly paranoid, jumping at every unexpected sound and constantly scanning their surroundings for threats. Harrison grew frustrated with their slow progress, arguing that they should abandon stealth and move quickly toward their objective. Mills tried to maintain team cohesion by projecting confidence he was beginning not to feel. The signs of pursuit were becoming more obvious, suggesting that their tracker was either extremely skilled or deliberately allowing them to know they were being followed. Either possibility was troubling for someone who had assumed this would be a straightforward exercise. During their second night in the field, the team's nerves were tested when they heard movement in the darkness around their position. Sounds that could have been animals, wind, or human activity kept them alert throughout the night. By morning, all three were showing signs of stress and fatigue that went beyond normal exercise expectations. What they didn't realize was that Sarah had spent the night demonstrating exactly how close an experienced operator could approach without detection. She had moved within 20 feet of their position multiple times, observing their security procedures and noting their psychological state. Her movements were deliberate, designed to create just enough disturbance to keep them nervous without revealing her actual capabilities. The third day would bring the confrontation that would define their understanding of what elite training actually meant. Sarah had planned a scenario that would test not only their tactical skills, but their assumptions about combat, training, and the qualifications of their instructors. As the team moved toward their final objective, they encountered what appeared to be an opportunity for success. The extraction point was visible in the distance, and no obvious threats were present. Their route would take them through an open area where they would be exposed but could move quickly to their goal. Mills made the decision to risk rapid movement across the exposed ground. From his perspective, speed would be their best protection against any pursuing forces. The plan was sound according to conventional military doctrine, and his teammates agreed with the assessment. They began their final approach with confidence renewed by the proximity of success. The extraction point was less than a mile away, and they had successfully evaded capture for nearly 3 full days. Mills felt vindicated in his belief that practical military experience could overcome any theoretical advantages their instructors might claim. The trap was perfect in its simplicity. Sarah had predicted their exact approach route and timing, allowing her to position herself along their path with complete concealment. Her position offered clear observation of the terrain they would cross, while remaining invisible to anyone approaching from their direction. When Mills's team emerged from the tree line and began crossing the open ground, they moved with the confidence of soldiers who believed they had outsmarted their opposition. Their formation was good, their spacing appropriate, and their alertness high. By all conventional measures, they were executing their mission properly. Sarah waited until they were completely committed to their approach before initiating contact. Her first action was not to capture them, but to demonstrate how completely they had been anticipated. Using a laser designator visible only through night vision equipment, she painted each team member in sequence, showing that she had them under observation and could have eliminated them at any point. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Mills realized that not only had their movements been predicted, but their hunter had been in position long enough to study their approach and choose the optimal moment for engagement. The 3 recruits found themselves facing a level of tactical sophistication they had never encountered. Rather than immediately ending the exercise, Sarah allowed them to attempt evasion. This decision transformed the encounter from a simple training failure into a masterclass in the difference between conventional combat skills and elite operational capabilities. What followed was 45 seconds that would reshape their understanding of military proficiency forever. Mills, Torres, and Harrison were about to learn what 12 years of special operations training could accomplish when applied by someone who had earned respect through demonstrated excellence rather than assumed authority. The lessons they were about to receive would go far beyond tactical techniques or physical skills. They would discover that questioning someone's qualifications was very different from testing those qualifications under field conditions. Most importantly, they would learn that the woman they had dismissed as an unqualified instructor was actually a predator who had chosen to teach rather than hunt. As Sarah stepped out of concealment, her voice carried across the open ground with quiet authority. "Remember who I am," she said, her words carrying years of earned confidence and hard-won respect. The three recruits were about to discover exactly what those words meant and why Commander Sarah "Ghost" Martinez had earned every decoration, every commendation, and every moment of recognition her service record contained. The final phase of their education was about to begin, and it would prove more valuable than anything they could have learned from a textbook or classroom lecture. Some lessons could only be taught through direct experience, and Sarah was about to provide one that would last for the rest of their careers. The 45 seconds that followed would become the stuff of legend among naval special warfare training circles, retold countless times as an example of why respect must be earned rather than assumed. What the three recruits experienced in that brief span of time compressed years of tactical education into a single, unforgettable lesson about the reality of elite military capabilities. Sarah's emergence from concealment was like watching a master class in operational psychology. She didn't simply step out from behind cover, she materialized from terrain that the recruits had carefully observed and deemed empty. Her position had been so perfectly chosen and her camouflage so complete that her sudden appearance seemed almost supernatural. Mills's first instinct was to reach for his training weapon, a reaction drilled into him through years of combat preparation. His hand moved toward his rifle with the speed and precision of an experienced soldier, but the motion stopped halfway through its execution. Sarah had anticipated this response and was already positioned to intercept any aggressive action. In the space of a heartbeat, she demonstrated why SEAL training emphasized speed and precision over raw strength. Her movement toward Mills was fluid and economical, covering the distance between them in what seemed like an impossibly short time. Torres and Harrison, positioned to either side of their team leader, found themselves facing a tactical situation they had never encountered. The first lesson came as Mills attempted to bring his weapon to bear. Sarah's approach angle had been calculated to limit his options, forcing him into a position where his rifle became a liability rather than an asset. Before he could complete his draw, she had closed the distance and established physical control of both his weapon and his body position. The technique she used was not the kind of flashy martial arts move that looked impressive in movies. Instead, it was the product of countless hours of close-quarters combat training refined through actual field experience. Every movement served a specific tactical purpose, designed to neutralize threats efficiently while maintaining awareness of other potential dangers. Torres, watching his team leader being controlled so completely, made the decision to intervene. His military training had taught him to support teammates under attack, and his loyalty to Mills overcame any hesitation about engaging an instructor. He moved toward the struggle with the intention of using his size advantage to even the odds. This decision provided Sarah with an opportunity to demonstrate why special operations training emphasized situational awareness above all other skills. Even while maintaining control of Mills, she had been tracking Torres's position and anticipating his likely actions. Her response to his approach was immediate and devastating. Using Mills's own body weight and momentum as a weapon, Sarah executed a maneuver that sent Torres sprawling while simultaneously maintaining her control over the team leader. The technique was so smooth that observers might have thought it was choreographed, but the shocked expressions on both men's faces made it clear that this was improvised adaptation to changing circumstances. Harrison found himself facing a psychological crisis that would reshape his understanding of combat dynamics. His two friends, both of whom he considered superior fighters, had been neutralized in seconds by an opponent they had dismissed as unqualified. His training told him to engage, but his survival instincts warned him that conventional tactics were useless in this situation. Sarah's voice cut through the silence that followed the brief exchange. "You have approximately 30 seconds to demonstrate everything you learned about close-quarters combat," she informed Harrison calmly. "Use them wisely, because this is the only practical examination you'll receive." The challenge was delivered without malice or arrogance, simply as a statement of fact. Sarah understood that Harrison needed to test his skills against hers before he could accept the reality of the capability gap between them. This was not about humiliation. It was about education through direct experience. Harrison's approach was careful and methodical, showing respect for both his opponent and the seriousness of the situation. His stance and movement demonstrated solid training and natural athletic ability. Under normal circumstances, he would have been a formidable opponent for most people he might encounter. However, these were not normal circumstances. Harrison was facing someone whose combat skills had been tested against opponents who were genuinely trying to kill her. Every technique in Sarah's arsenal had been proven under conditions where failure meant death, not merely losing a training exercise. The engagement lasted exactly as long as Sarah allowed it to continue. She could have ended it immediately, but doing so would have provided less educational value than demonstrating the systematic breakdown of Harrison's defenses. Her counterattacks came in measured progression, each one teaching a specific lesson about the limitations of conventional training. First, she demonstrated how superior timing could negate advantages in reach and strength. Harrison's attacks, while technically proficient, followed patterns that Sarah had encountered countless times before. Her responses came not from memorized techniques, but from an intuitive understanding of combat dynamics developed through years of real-world application. Next, she showed how tactical positioning could create advantages that transcended physical capabilities. By controlling distance and angles of attack, Sarah forced Harrison into positions where his natural advantages became irrelevant. He found himself constantly reacting to her initiatives rather than implementing his own strategy. The final lesson involved psychological pressure and its effect on decision-making. As Harrison realized that none of his techniques were having their intended effect, his confidence began to erode. This mental shift translated into hesitation and doubt that Sarah exploited ruthlessly, demonstrating how combat effectiveness depended as much on mental state as on physical skill. When the engagement ended, all three recruits found themselves in submission holds that left them completely helpless, despite their combined advantages in size, strength, and numbers. The position was maintained just long enough for them to understand their situation fully before Sarah released them and stepped back. The silence that followed was profound. Mills, Torres, and Harrison sat on the ground where they had fallen, staring at their instructor with expressions that mixed shock, respect, and dawning understanding. Everything they thought they knew about military hierarchies and combat effectiveness had been challenged in less than a minute. Sarah's demeanor remained calm and professional throughout. She offered each man assistance in getting to his feet, checking to ensure that none had sustained injuries during the brief exchange. Her concern for their welfare was genuine, reflecting the protective instincts that had made her legendary among the Marines she had rescued during her deployments. "Your conventional training is solid," she told them as they regrouped. "Your tactical thinking shows good understanding of basic principles, and your physical conditioning is excellent. These are important foundations that will serve you well throughout your careers." The compliments were sincere, delivered without condescension or irony. Sarah understood that effective instruction required building confidence as well as providing correction. These three recruits had potential. They simply needed guidance in channeling their abilities more effectively. "However," she continued, "special operations requires capabilities that go beyond conventional military training. The difference isn't about intelligence or dedication or courage. It's about the specific skills needed for missions that can't be accomplished through standard procedures." Mills was the first to speak, his voice subdued but respectful. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. We made assumptions about your qualifications based on incomplete information." His words came with visible difficulty. the product of a man confronting the reality that his prejudices had led him to underestimate someone whose capabilities far exceeded his own. Torres and Harrison echoed their teammates' sentiments, each acknowledging their role in the disrespectful behavior that had characterized their first weeks of training. The apologies were clearly genuine, motivated not by fear of punishment, but by recognition that they had wronged someone who deserved their respect. Sarah accepted their apologies graciously, while making it clear that the real measure of their growth would be demonstrated through future actions rather than words. The incident had provided valuable lessons for everyone involved, but those lessons would only have lasting value if they translated into improved performance and attitude. The remainder of the exercise proceeded with dramatically different dynamics. Mills, Torres, and Harrison approached their remaining challenges with newfound humility and genuine eagerness to learn. Their questions during instruction sessions became focused on understanding rather than challenging, and their interactions with Sarah reflected authentic respect rather than grudging compliance. Other recruits in the class noticed the change immediately. The three men who had previously positioned themselves as informal leaders now deferred to Sarah's expertise without reservation. Their transformation had a ripple effect throughout the group, creating an atmosphere more conducive to learning and mutual support. When the exercise concluded and all teams had reached their extraction points, the debriefing session provided an opportunity for broader discussion about the lessons learned. Sarah used the three friends' experience as a case study in the importance of keeping an open mind and recognizing that expertise could come from unexpected sources. The story of their 45-second encounter with reality spread quickly through the naval special warfare community. Other instructors used it as an example of why assumptions about gender and combat effectiveness could be dangerous in operational environments. For many, it reinforced the principle that capability should be judged based on demonstrated performance, rather than preconceived notions. Mills, Torres, and Harrison completed their training with distinction, earning their places in special operations units through dedication and improved understanding of what excellence actually required. Their experience with Sarah became a defining moment in their military careers, teaching them lessons about respect, humility, and the danger of underestimating others based on surface characteristics. Years later, when they encountered other female operators in the field, their reaction was markedly different from their initial response to Sarah. They had learned to evaluate colleagues based on competence and character rather than gender or appearance. The lesson had been expensive in terms of pride, but invaluable in terms of personal growth. Sarah continued her instructor duties with the quiet satisfaction that came from successful teaching. The three recruits who had once questioned her qualifications became some of her strongest advocates within their units. They understood better than most what Ghost was capable of because they had experienced it firsthand. The incident also reinforced Sarah's own understanding of why her transition from field operations to instruction was important. Each class of recruits represented the future of special operations, and their attitudes toward diversity and inclusion would shape the community for decades to come. By addressing prejudice directly and professionally, she was helping to create a more effective and unified force. In quiet moments, Sarah sometimes reflected on how different her career might have been if she had always received the respect her qualifications deserved. However, she had learned that respect earned through demonstrated excellence was more valuable than respect given automatically based on rank or position. The challenges she had faced had made her stronger and more effective, both as an operator and as a leader. The three recruits who had tried to trap her with their assumptions about gender and combat effectiveness had instead trapped themselves in outdated thinking that limited their own potential for growth. Sarah's 45-second demonstration had freed them from those limitations, opening their minds to possibilities they had never previously considered. Their story became part of the oral tradition within naval special warfare, passed down from instructor to student as a reminder that excellence comes in many forms and should never be underestimated. For Sarah, it represented one more successful mission in a career dedicated to serving her country and her fellow warriors. The woman who had once been told she wasn't strong enough for military service had proven that strength came in many forms. Her legacy would be measured not only by the missions she had completed, but by the minds she had changed and the barriers she had broken. Commander Sarah Ghost Martinez had indeed reminded them who she was, and that lesson would echo through their careers and beyond.